Without further ado, happy to welcome Dave Mass. We had an opportunity to meet at the Indigenous Journalists Association this past summer. Dave is the director of investigations at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. That is a nonprofit organization that advocates for human rights in the digital age, which is now. He also manages the Atlas of Surveillance.org project in partnership with the University of Nevada Reno's Reynolds School of Journalism. So, Dave, go ahead and take it away. Pass it over to you.
Awesome. So I am so pleased to be here today. I was actually looking at my emails, and Ray and I first started communicating in 2020. And so I've been a fan of Indigenous Women Rising for this long, and I'm just so excited to help. That was a really great introduction. The only thing I would sort of add is just I'm going to be talking a lot about surveillance technology and tribal communities, but I'm not an Indigenous person myself. So what I'm not going to be doing today is telling you what you should be doing with the information I give you. I'm just going to give you a lot of information. And I can explain some of the problems that we've encountered in various contexts across the United States and also globally. But again, I'm not here to mess with your sovereignty, but there are some issues here that I think you will see are going to be challenging your sovereignty. With that, I'm just going to jump into this slide deck here. And as I'm doing this, I'll just sort of tell you that this slide deck is designed to be revisited. IWR is going to share this slide deck with you so you have access to it because I've got a lot of information that is going to go really quickly. So yeah, we're talking about law enforcement, surveillance technology, and indigenous communities. Before I get too far, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We've been around since 1990, and we work to ensure that our freedoms are enhanced and protected as society grows in society, or sorry, as technology grows in society. That means we work on issues related to privacy, free expression, innovation, government transparency, and we have a team of lawyers, activists, technologists, and researchers who all work together to try to expose harms and also help make the world better for folks through technology policy. Another thing I want to do is acknowledge two of the other people who contributed research to this project. One is Des Pelter, who is a former intern at UNR, and Paul Tepper, a EFF special advisor, who both compiled a lot of the research that we're going to be looking at today. So I work on something called street level surveillance. That's my specialty at EFF. And this is a term we use to refer to all the different kinds of surveillance technology used by law enforcement. And we're going to go over a lot of this, but this might be drones or license plate readers or even body-worn cameras and face recognition. There's a whole arsenal of technologies that are at the disposal of police these days. And it's important to know what they do because it's not like the old days where police just sat there with binoculars watching one person. These technologies are designed to monitor everyone. Now, we have something called the Atlas of Surveillance Project, where we are trying to document all the different technologies used by law enforcement across the United States. So, atlasofsurveillance.org is where it is. We have a map, but we also have the ability for you to search. And so, I've put in Bernalillo County here for all our Albuquerque folks, where you can type in a place that you live and you can see all the technologies in use by local law enforcement. And each one has a link, so you can various links and sources. So, if you wanted to get more information. But currently the Atlas has over 15,000 data points. We are continually adding to this all the time. It covers 12 different kinds of technologies or surveillance programs, and we have at least one piece of information about 9,000 different law enforcement agencies. For context, there are something like 18,000 police departments and sheriffs and other law enforcement agencies in the United States, so it's going to be an ongoing project for us. But this is a crowdsourcing project, and we've had more than 1,500 students and volunteers contribute to the project over time. But as we do this sort of research nationwide, we end up gathering a lot of information about tribal police departments. So we have over 140 different technologies that we found that tribal police have been purchasing. But in our research, we've encountered, certain unique issues that are very particular to tribal police departments. And the first is that they have different, tribal governments are different than, your average city government or state government or county government. Each one is different. They have different levels of transparency and governance. Make their own laws. You all are aware of this. But it makes it difficult to look place to place because each time you have to research things a little bit differently. There's also this gray area that we find between security at casinos and law enforcement. And in some tribes, these are completely separate, and sometimes they're merged, and sometimes it's kind of squishy between who's in charge of that, casino camera system. Is it police? Is it security? What powers do people have? All of our research is based off of things that we can find online, like through government websites or through news websites. And sadly, a lot of tribal communities just don't have good, news organizations covering them, or their governments don't have a website where they post agendas and meeting minutes and all the other things that you might see from a major city. And then the other thing that makes it difficult is that there's this real complication between tribal sovereignty and the types of collaboration that we see with local, state, and federal agencies. And we'll go into that a bit more later. When you get this presentation, there is a link in here to that goes directly into all the data that we've collected. Before I go into the individual places, I want to give you some sort of background of why we care about surveillance and why it's important to advocate on these issues. And one of the things is there's just a lot of unknowns. The short-term goals of surveillance may seem obvious. You'll have police telling you it's for public safety, it's to solve crimes, but that's not the end of it. We have to ask questions like, how will these technologies change policing and the criminal justice system in the long term? And how will those changes end up impacting society as a whole? And ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to ask who is really benefiting from these systems? Is it the people? Is it the companies? Is it those in power? And the reason I ask that question is that, in my view, surveillance isn't about public safety or solving crimes. It's about control, it's about power, and it is often about money. I'm going to go over some of the common problems that we see with surveillance wherever we look in the country. First of all, a lot of the surveillance is mass surveillance. That means these technologies collect information on you, whether or not you've been involved in a crime. They collect information on everyone. A lot of these systems make errors. A lot of them are based on unfinished algorithms. And when surveillance makes a mistake, it can pull innocent people into the criminal justice system or put them into dangerous situations. A lot of the surveillance technology can result in disproportionate or unequal policing of neighborhoods, or they might, or different levels of service. A lot of this technology has a mission drift. Police might come in saying, we need this technology because we have terrorism or kidnappings, but ultimately ends up being used for a lot of low-level crimes or even to just go after people who are homeless. The technology can actually skew priorities. Police may gravitate towards crimes that are most easily solved with surveillance technology, or towards the businesses who are paying for the technology. We also see that there's a racial and socioeconomic impact, that this stuff can often disproportionately harm communities of color. This technology also has what we call a chilling effect. The deployment of it can discourage or suppress free expression, the freedom of the press, the right to organize, the freedom to worship. A lot of this technology is very secret by design, won't be made available to the public, maybe even be withheld from courts. When I talk about misuse, a lot of this technology is abused by corrupt cops. They might use it for their own personal purposes. They might use it against their political enemies. It just is sort of something that is just so poorly controlled that it can be abused quite easily. Also, it's just wasteful. This stuff is expensive, and there are other things to spend public money on. We also see that this is very profit motivated. You often see this nasty relationship between salesmen and police officials, and that ultimately this ends up benefiting the companies more than what the community needs. And anytime you introduce a technological system like this, you have cybersecurity issues that come up. These systems can be vulnerable to breaches, and when these systems are breached, it puts us all at risk. And then also there's something that we call the circumvention of due process. A lot of these systems are now relying on commercial data or corporate data that allows them to get around the Fourth Amendment or other due process because maybe they're not collecting themselves, they're getting it from somebody else. So that's kind of like the overview of like the problems we have, but let me take you through the technologies. And how I have this set up is we're going to go through each individual technology. We're going to look at some of the problems, and I'm going to take you through which tribes are using them and some of the examples that we found over through our research. Before I get into it, though, I want to sort of, if you're not familiar with the hip hop group Indigenous Cats, they're fantastic. They had a song come out last year, and there was a bit from it that really spoke to me. And uh, it goes, "War against humanity. Turn the TV off, but they still see you in the screens. Watching from above, yeah, they know just where you be. Everywhere I go, I feel like someone's watching me." This really sort of articulates the world that we live in now, in that, yes, you are being watched quite a bit all the time because of these networks of surveillance that are being set up. So I want to start with body-worn cameras. And you might be familiar with body-worn cameras as a transparency mechanism, as an accountability mechanism. That's how these became so widespread during the Obama administration. The Obama administration, responding to a lot of like high-profile police brutality cases, started pitching this as a solution, and they used U.S. Department of Justice funding and state level programs to throw lots of money at police to buy this technology. But that's not really how it panned out in the end. Ultimately, we now have a system where police are essentially walking surveillance towers, and all of these cameras are now being fed into more and more aggressive and advanced video analytics systems. And we'll talk a little bit about more about that in the moment. In a moment, I need to move my little zoom window around here. Okay, so far we have identified 5,415 police departments across the United States, and these are also sheriff's departments that use body-worn cameras. The number is going to be much higher than that, but this is where we are so far. Of those, we have identified 113 tribal police departments with body-worn cameras, and so you can see some examples here. We have the Quinault in Washington's cameras, the Shingle Springs in California, the Comanche in Oklahoma. You can see it's a very common thing for them to have body worn cameras. And I've actually given you three different models here of what they're using. Now, a lot of the ways the tribes have gotten a hold of these cameras are through a federal program called the Small Rural Tribal Body Worn Camera Program. Over between 2022 and 2024, about $700,000 has gone to 27 tribes to purchase just 472 cameras. So that works out to about $1,500 per camera. But that's one of the prime ways that these have been acquired. Now, body-worn cameras are not just like recording things anymore. We're starting to see face recognition applied to them. So one particular brand called Reveal, which I'm not sure I know of any tribes who are using this, but this is one that's being promoted quite a lot these days, does live face recognition of everyone who walks in range of a police officer. Now, to compete with this, one of the biggest manufacturers of body-worn cameras named Axon is now also testing out face recognition. For years, they said, we're not going to do face recognition on our body worn cameras, but now they are testing it out in Edmonton, Canada, where 50 police officers are doing live face recognition with their body worn cameras. And if this pilot project works out, we're going to see this go across the United States very quickly. Now, Axon is the most popular single brand that we've identified among tribal agencies. So here's a list of the tribes who are using Axon. So if face recognition is applied, we're going to end up seeing this, being offered to communities throughout the country. But that's not the only thing that we're worried about. So Axon, which also makes tasers, by the way, that's their big product they sell to law enforcement is tasers. But they also have a new product they purchased called Fuses. And Fuses is basically like networks all of the cameras in a community. It might be like CCTV cameras, but it is also body worn cameras, and it'll put it on like kind of a map so that any officer could bring up this map and tap a body worn camera on the map in real time and see what's going on. And so that's what I mean that these are now like walking surveillance networks because they're available through this is like an iPad. This is like a web app. You could bring this up on an iPad or anything. Now, I don't know any tribes using Fuses quite yet, but I do know it's coming. Another thing that Axon has introduced is a generative AI system called Draft One. And what this does is it uses essentially ChatGPT to take body worn camera audio and to write a police report for the officer. So the officer doesn't even have to write their report at the end of the day anymore. This AI listens to the audio recording and then writes it up. And so here's kind of an example of what this looks like. You know, it types it up, it has a little like fill in the blanks that an officer can add in there. And you might say, like, well, what's the problem with this? I mean, maybe that makes, officers' jobs easier. Maybe it results in more accuracy. Well, story from a couple weeks ago out of Utah. There was a police report that talked about a police officer turning into a frog during an encounter. And the reason the AI thought the officer had turned into a frog, it turns out, is that the film, The Princess and the Frog, was playing in the background during this police visit. And the officer was too lazy or too sloppy to check his police report to notice that this ridiculous thing had been recorded and documented in this official document. So we really do worry about how these AI systems are going to misrepresent interactions, particularly with communities who don't speak television English, who maybe are using very specific dialects or idioms or are moving between languages because the AI is going to get that wrong, and that might end up affecting people's criminal records. So I did see some questions up in the chat. I haven't actually opened them. Is there anything in there that, I see they are questions that Marcus has answered. All right. I'm going to jump into talking about another technology called license plate readers. These are in the news a lot right now, but essentially, license plate readers are cameras that take a picture of your car and document lots of information about your car and put it into a searchable database. Now, we often see these cameras in fixed locations, like on poles or on street lights, but they might be attached to patrol cars as well. Or they might even be attached to trailers that can be moved around and set in various neighborhoods. So, what do these collect? Well, first off, they usually collect the GPS coordinates of a vehicle. They also document the time and date of when that vehicle was seen. They document the license plate, including the state. But then they also do vehicle characteristics, like the type of vehicle, the model of the vehicle, the color of the vehicle. Then they'll grab distinguishing characteristics, such as the bumper sticker, whether the car is damaged, whether you've made alterations to your vehicle, such as aftermarket rims, and then it'll also keep video or photos depending on which company we're talking about, and then it puts that into a centralized database. One of the nastiest practices that I've ever seen is for these license plate readers you see on a patrol car. This is a slide from a training presentation in Chandler, Arizona, in which the police say that when you have 10-8 time, 10-8 time means you're not doing anything else. You're just in between calls. What you should do is grid a neighborhood. And that means driving up and down every block to gather information on all the vehicles that are parked in that neighborhood. And the thing that's really telling about this slide to me is it says to help us gather intel to solve future cases. This really marks a change from police gathering evidence to solve crimes that have happened to gathering intelligence to solve crimes that have not happened and may never happen. So, how are license plate readers used? Like, how is that data used? Well, first of all, there's real-time alerts. Police can add a vehicle to what is called the hot list. And if you're on that hot list, a police officer is going to get an alert every time your vehicle is seen by one of these cameras. A police officer can also look at historical travel patterns. They can put in your license plate and they can see all of the places your car was captured on camera, sometimes going back years. They can put in a location, like or an area, and see what cars were in that area at a particular time. Maybe they don't even know a license plate. They just know that they're looking for a blue, Toyota hatchback. They can type in blue Toyota hatchback, and they will get a list of vehicles matching that description that were around a certain location at a certain time. They can also map out the network of a community. If they can put in one vehicle and they can say, show us what other vehicles are seen traveling with that car or are seen parked to that next to that car on a regular basis. They can even get predictions about where you're going to be. If they're like, I'm looking for this person, where might they be at 3 o'clock? The system may be able to generate a prediction. This data is also shared really widely. It's not like the Albuquerque Police Department is collecting the data and only keeping it to itself. No, this stuff is being shared with agencies across the state and often across the country. And now this data is also being integrated with other kinds of surveillance technology, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, I often have people tell me, like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about. And I immediately go to this case out of Aurora, Colorado, where an ALPR system made a mistake, and it said that this blue SUV in this picture was a stolen motorcycle from Montana. Police pulled out this car full of black children and made them lay face down on the sidewalk, on the concrete. And it just breaks my heart. This little, like, she must be 4 or 5, with her pink princess crown. This is just disgusting to me. None of these kids had anything to worry about. They weren't doing anything wrong, but now they have lifelong trauma from this incident with police. Now, for folks in New Mexico, this has happened multiple times in your vicinity, particularly in Espanola. There have been at least two occasions where minors have, due to a mistake made by a license plate reader, minors have been pulled out and like essentially assaulted by cops, have been pulled out, handcuffed, had guns pointed at them because of a mistake made by an ALPR system. We also see license plate readers abused by police. So here are two cases out of just, in Kansas within a very short period of time, a couple of years ago, where police were using these systems to stalk their exes, to just go on, put in their plates, see where they've been. Now, we have more than 4,000 agencies nationwide that we have documented using license plate readers. I think there are a few thousand more, and every day we see like a new place adopting a license plate reader system. But there are quite a few tribal police departments using license plate readers. So here's the running list we have of about 18 that are using them. We actually have data about the Catawba and how they use license plate readers. So they have 8 cameras. Um, uh, they store their data for 30 days, but they share that data. This is a sovereign nation, but they share their data they're collecting with more than 1,400 other law enforcement agencies around the country. And that means over just a 1 month period from about Christmas to today, they scanned 36,000 vehicles with those 8 cameras, and that data was shared with 1,400 agencies nationwide. Now, over that period, the Catawba police did 31 searches, and when they run a search through the system, they're supposed to say why. The most common reason they said was suspicious. Nothing more than suspicious. Like, what is that? What is suspicious? Like, being shady, just inherently looking shady, is not a crime. We can all look shady. I look a little shady. But, they're not saying that this is somebody who's suspected of a crime. They're just saying this is suspicious. So we're going to look up and invade their privacy. Now, one of the main companies selling this, like probably the most popular company nationwide right now, is called Flock Safety. Now, Flock Safety last summer said that they had 24 tribes that were using their technology, but she wouldn't tell who those were. She said there was some confidentiality, and she cannot identify which tribes have it. Now, in addition to the things that I showed you before, we have actually identified another, I think 12 or 13 agencies that we know have the ability to search the ALPR database, but we don't actually know whether they have cameras themselves. We know they could search the system, we just don't know whether they have installed the cameras. And so it's interesting. So the Tulalip are one of the agencies on our list, and somebody else, not us, filed a Public Records Act request with the Tulalip Tribal Police Department to ask about their license plate readers. And Tulalip sent this very like handwritten response saying Tulalip Tribe is a sovereign nation. We are not subject to the Washington State's Records Act. Your request is denied. And on first looking at this, I was like, well, good for you. You're a sovereign nation. You don't have to respond to public records laws. But then when I looked a little closer, I just sort of noticed that the Tulalip aren't just tribal police. They've actually been empowered by the state of Washington to enforce Washington state laws and federal laws on both tribal citizens and non-tribal citizens. So essentially, they're just like general cops, but they are not subject to the laws that other cops are subject to. They are only subject to Tulalip law. Now, we did go through, was able to get data from actually the Yakima Police Department, which is a non-tribal police department, but they revealed who had searched their database. And so I can give you this sort of sense of how this group of tribal police departments, how many searches they are running through the system in a period that went from August 1st to October 16th. And you can see in that period, the Tulalip ran 1,000 searches. And that's just wild. That is a lot of searches that they're running they don't have that many crimes happening to actually justify that. But all of this you can kind of see like that, there's a lot of surveillance going on. Now, two of the big major stories that have gone around recently about these flock systems is how ICE and CBP have been able to get access to these systems for immigration enforcement by having other agencies run searches or running searches themselves. There was also a high-profile case where some law enforcement officers in Johnson County, Texas, were trying to track down a woman who had done a self-administered abortion. In both of those cases, where the nationwide network of license plate reader data was searched, that likely accessed or at least searched through data held by these tribal police departments that use flock cameras. And you might say, well, how are they getting these? Well, a big thing that happened is at the National Native American Law Enforcement Association conference in 2024, Flock was a sponsor and had a panel where they laid this out for police chiefs across the country. This is something that Flock does quite a lot. They just go to police conferences, they wine and dine police officials, and then they end up coming back to them and scoring these kinds of contracts. We're also seeing a lot of license plate readers being installed by casinos, and then that making its way to, sorry, that making its way to law enforcement. So, for example, at the Red Hawk Casino, this is the Shingle Springs band of Miwok Indians in California. They've installed license plate readers by a company called AutoView at the casino, but police are able to go to them and get data about everybody who visited the casino. And so, in this sort of success story, as they talk as the company promotes it, there was a homicide case, and they were able to match the plate of the suspect to a plate that was captured at the casino. Here's another example from the Mohegan Tribal Police. They were able to match the plates off a license plate reader from the casino's Riverview garage, and then match that. Which was this was just a woman who'd been driving erratically, and they let her. So there was a traffic stop. She drove away. It was not a particularly high level thing, but they used license plate readers to find her anyway. Now, it's not just like when we're talking about tribes and ALPR, it's not just the tribes acquiring police license plate readers. We've actually had cases where tribes are funding license plate readers for external agencies. So, for example, in 2017, one of the ways that the Washington State Patrol was able to purchase ALPRs is that two different tribes, the Nisqually and the Puyallup, both gave them money, the state entity, to buy surveillance technology. Um, Now, somebody I've spent a lot of time talking with is this artist, McKay Lewis, who's of the Thana Otham. And, this is a piece of her art, by the way. You can check her out on Instagram. She's amazing. But, she says, as someone who grew up in pre-border checkpoints on our reservation, I'm constantly faced with the fact that my own daughter may never get to experience that. Now, every Border Patrol checkpoint has a license plate reader, for the Thana Otham. So their land is right along the Arizona border. McKay and I went and documented a lot of the license plate readers, and I also got public records to further document it. And you can see the Tana Otham Nation land, and you can see there is no way in and out of their land without hitting a license plate reader. And these license plate readers are controlled by CBP, the Drug Enforcement Agency, even local law enforcement, and a lot of these are concealed. So if you look on the right at this orange traffic barrel, that's actually a license plate reader, and there's a hole cut in it with a camera that is capturing vehicles. I want to talk about drones for a bit. So a lot of law enforcement agencies have acquired drones, and historically these drones have been used to like document crime and accident scenes after the fact, or they've been used to surveil large gatherings such as protester barbecues. They're used in high dangerous situations like hostage situations or SWAT operations. They're often used in search and rescue or fire situations. But now we're seeing a lot of different uses, including something called drone as first responders, which we'll talk about in a moment. So we've documented 1,800 agencies in the country that are using drones. Here's the list of agencies that the tribal agencies that we've identified using drones as well. So there's quite a few. I think there's probably quite a bit more because drones are very popular with rural police departments and sheriffs. It's just we haven't been able to get the documentation on it yet. Um, the Millock Tribal Police Department has actually posted their policy online for using drones or unmanned aerial vehicles. You see UAV here. And to their credit, they actually have a pretty decent policy that talks about how, the Millock Band Tribal Police will not put face recognition on their drones. They're not going to put weapons on their drones, and they're not going to collect data on protests or demonstrations unless they have gotten a search warrant or there's some sort of emergency exception. And this is they're the exception to the rule. I haven't seen a lot of these policies for tribal police or for police in general that have these kind of limitations. Um, Now, I want to talk about the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma for a moment. So, they actually have this innovation center for drones where they're working on something called beyond visual line of sight. This is the idea that you can fly a drone beyond where you can see it. And this means that they are at the forefront of helping drones become even more encroached in society. Like they're actually moving the ball forward. Before I get there, just want to show you how they've been using drones. So in 2024, for example, they flew one of their drones over the Labor Day festival, and they surveilled it for about 6, 7 hours a day for surveillance and crowd monitoring. Nothing happened there, but they were up in the air basically the entire time at their Labor Day session. But that beyond visual light thing. So here are two sort of press releases from a company called U Avionics, who has a deal with the Choctaw Nation's Innovation Center for these beyond visual like line of sight operations. These are specifically designed to put forward more surveillance for police through this thing called a drone as first responder program. And UVonics, like specifically, if you want to see the chain, UVonics develops it at Choctaw and then takes it and it enters the Oswego City Police Department. Now, what is a drone as first responder program? Well, the idea is that you put drone stations around your city or around your community, and anytime there's a 911 call, you send a drone there first. So drones are continuously flying around responding to things. And the idea is that this is going to make everyone safer because police are going to know what's on the ground first before they show up guns blazing. They're able to check out a situation first and just have better situational awareness. But what we've seen over time, so this was Chula Vista, by the way. So Chula Vista, California was the first place that adopted a drone as first responder program. But once you start looking at actual data of what they're actually sending drones out for, they're usually not for like these high profile things like they claim. Like it's often vandalism or it's often things related to unhoused people, like, harassing a person who's sleeping on the sidewalk. I like these ones from Oceanside, California that I looked at recently, where they sent out a drone for about 10 minutes because somebody said their car was stolen and then it just turned out it wasn't stolen. They misplaced it. And so police flew a drone around to help them find their missing car. The second one here is like somebody called about complaints about dogs being on the beach illegally, so they had to send out a drone for that. And then they sent out a drone because like somebody's car alarm kept going off and then the vehicle left the area. Like these are like, drones up in the air over and over again, but for like very small things. And one of the reasons it's important to know about this is because if drones are flying around all the time, they might be passively collecting data as they fly. So, we recently reported that drones are going to be tracking your car. So drones are now going to have license plate readers attached to them, or their video feed will be fed into license plate readers. The FBI is trying to get a contract for drones with face recognition. So if you imagine you have drones flying around responding to 911 calls, but at the same time they're gathering data on your car, they're gathering data on your face. That is not the world that we particularly want to live in. So speaking of face recognition, I'm going to jump into this. So you may have heard of biometrics. Biometrics are basically using parts of your body to identify who you are. So if you're familiar with fingerprints, That's one of the earliest biometrics that have been in use in law enforcement. Now, what face recognition does is it takes a picture of you and it marks off like the distance between maybe your eyes and your nose and your nose and your cheeks to create this kind of fingerprint of your face. And then they'll take another photo or compare that to another photo to see if those markers match. So the way we see face recognition used these days, so we use police, see police using it for three main purposes. One is to confirm somebody's identity. Are you who you say you are? The second is forensic use. They have maybe a photo from a bank robbery and they want to know who that person is. So they run that image against a face recognition database. And then also real-time surveillance. That's going to be those body cameras or on CCTV cameras where they're running face recognition and they're either identifying everybody or they're allowing you to track people based on their faces. And so a police officer might be able to access face recognition from like their workstation at the headquarters. They might be able to use it on their phones or mobile devices, or like I said, it might just be attached to the security cameras and part of the ongoing surveillance. Now we've got about 1,000 agencies so far that we've documented having face recognition capabilities. There's a lot more than this. This is just a very hard thing to research. This is growing all the time. One of the problems is that it makes mistakes all the time, particularly with people of color, and even within that subsection, it is particularly bad at identifying black men. Of the numerous cases that we found of misidentification, I think only one is like a white dude, and the rest are either black men or black women. And so here's two examples from Detroit where men had been arrested and charged with crimes because a face recognition algorithm made a mistake. This actually also happened on a tribal property. So the Meshontaka Pequot have a casino called the Foxwoods Resort Casino. They have live face recognition. So their cameras are doing live face recognition, looking for known sort of card cheats, looking for people who've been on their like banned list, etc. The casino system said that this black woman was somebody who'd been barred for the facility. And so security guards went up to her room, made her come down, her hair's in curlers, and she's like not ready to go out. It was her birthday, ruined her birthday, and she ended up suing. And it turned out it was because it made a mistake. It was not the person that they said it was. Let me introduce you to Carly Fisher. She is a law student in Oklahoma. She wrote an excellent paper about mugshots in Oklahoma and how these stigmatize Native American communities and individuals. And she noted that with face recognition, this is concerning with Native Americans because Native Americans do share common physical characteristics. And these physical characteristics can run the risk of racial profiling. Now, the federal body called NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technologies, does do tests for accuracy with face recognition systems. And they've done tests for accuracy with white faces, with black faces, with Asian faces, but they have never done the research for Native American populations. So we do not know how this technology is how accurate it is when it comes to being run against indigenous people. So here are some of the tribal police. So on the left here are tribal police with access to statewide face recognition systems. The ones on the upper right are tribal police who have their own face recognition systems. So the Osage Nation Police Department in Oklahoma and the Pueblo Pojoaque both have their own face recognition systems. We do believe the Meshontaka Pequot has a face recognition system as well as the Prairie Band of Powhatan in Kansas. And the reason I'm saying possibly is that a few years ago, BuzzFeed got a leak from a company called Clearview showing that both of these agencies had Clearview accounts and had run 50 face recognition searches. Now, what Clearview does is Clearview scrapes the entire internet to get everybody's images, and then you use their app and you take a picture of somebody, and it looks through all those images that it's scraped to try to identify you. To give you an examples of how this has been used by tribal police departments, so here's again something from the New Mexico area, yeah, where there had been these four suspects in a stolen vehicle case. Investigators got images from a store's video camera, ran them through Powhata's face recognition software, then identified at least one of the suspects. So here's another example from the. So when I was talking about like the squishiness between casino security and policing. So the Osage, the Osage Nation runs a casino that has literally hundreds of face recognition cameras around the property. Those are monitored by the police. And so they do actually use, the police actually do monitor the casino's face recognition and are getting those kinds of alerts in real time. You may have heard a lot about what ICE is doing in Minnesota right now and elsewhere in the country. ICE and CBP have an app called Mobile Fortify. This is an app that they are using to take a picture of people to determine whether they are migrants or not. You may have also heard that a lot of Indigenous people in the Minnesota area are being harassed and taken into custody. That is happening, and as a part of that happening, they are being these Indigenous people are being subjected to these face recognition scans with Mobile Fortify. So in this example that I have up on here, a 20-year-old had been pulled over. They had done this face recognition scan. The face recognition scan said this person was a U.S. citizen. ICE ignored it and took that person into custody for 6 hours anyway. So moving on to the next technology, and I hope everybody's still following along and I haven't lost you. So can't see us, so I'm just gonna hope everything's going well. I'm gonna talk about a technology called gunshot detection. So these are sensors that are placed around a community and purport to be able to hear when a gun goes off and tell police where that gunshot went off. So the idea is like you have a community that has like a gun problem, like a shootings problem. Police are able to get there sooner, and first aid is able to. I mean, the emergency EMTs are able to get there faster because these systems have gathered that information. But we have found 240 agencies across the country that are using this technology. But one of the problems here is that it's bunk. Like the technology is not accurate. So, in San Diego, for example, when a journalist researched it, they found that STPD was being sent to false alarms more often than the company was claiming. And even in San Francisco, courtroom testimony, like one of the companies was asked, well, how, tell us about your 90% accuracy rate. And they said, well, we kind of made it up. It was a marketing ploy. Now, these have been made mistakes as well. And again, here's an example of somebody in Chicago, again, just sort of pointing it out that this is another black man in America who has been put in jail because AI made a mistake and identified him as the suspect when he had nothing to do with the crime at hand. Um, so in Michigan, there had been pushback against this technology, and this group called We the People of Michigan had put it really well, one of the problems with this. I'm just going to read. So this one technology is called ShotSpotter, or this one company is called ShotSpotter. I'm just going to read this out. Let's be clear about what ShotSpotter does. The technology sends police, falsely expecting a shootout, into the black, brown, and poor communities where microphones are secretly embedded. Instead of preventing gun violence, ShotSpotter tech profits from it. Its entire business model is based on continuing violence and expansion. Now, we have two tribes one who has installed it and one who is going to soon. The St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Police Department in New York got a 857,000 grant from the state of New York to buy license plate readers, mobile cameras, drones, as well as gunshot detection devices. So this happened in 2024. They've either installed them already or they're going to be installing them soon. And then last year, the Navajo Nation in Arizona put out a request for proposals asking to purchase a system that does license plate recognition, surveillance cameras, and gunshot detection in one software platform. Right now, the only company that I think does that is Flock Safety. And sure enough, there are news articles that have coming out that Navajo Nation looks like it's about to contract with Flock Safety for this. I also want to talk about camera networks more generally and how they are turning into these things called real-time crime centers. But I want to introduce you briefly to social justice advocate Clinton Isham, because in response to the expansion of surveillance cameras in his community, he ended up posting this comment online that was pretty great, and it was, "Bro, all those cameras that tribal police put up better pay off. Police want to do surveillance on Indians to lock us up, but can't use them to protect us." And that's kind of the point that I've been trying to make, that a lot of these technologies aren't really there to like they're there to benefit one party and to harm another party. I want to give you an example. I don't know if you can see my t-shirt, but this is I'm wearing this t-shirt in honor of this event that happened in Santa Fe a few years ago. Actually, I guess it was almost 6 years ago now. But in Santa Fe, New Mexico, you may know the story. There was this extremely racist obelisk monument in downtown that really denigrated indigenous people. Activists got sick of waiting for it to be taken down, so they pulled it down themselves. There have been protests going on for many days, and if you can see in this image on the left, Santa Fe police set up a mobile surveillance tower to watch protesters. And they ended up capturing this image on the right showing who was involved in that. And then they used that video to identify two of the suspects and then charge them with crimes. Now, a lot of these cameras now are being fed into something called a real-time crime center. These are these high-tech headquarters where you see like the televisions, the TV movie style, like array of monitors watching things in real time. You're gonna have computers that are doing license plate readers and gunshot detection and maybe monitoring social media. When we started looking at this 4 or 5 years ago, there are maybe 70 places that have these, but as of now, we found 230 places across the country that have them, including the Salt River Pima Police Department. For my money, Salt River Pima Police Department might be the most technologically advanced police department, tribal police department in the country. They have everything that you can imagine, and a lot of it has to do with this guy, Jared Kusina, who was hired from the Phoenix Police Department to come in and bring all this technology in together. And so he developed their real-time crime center as well as all their other components. Some other things we're seeing around the country as well. The Kulispa department in Washington, they actually work with the Spokane Real-Time Crime Center. The Shingle Springs Tribal Police Department, so the Shingle Springs Tribal Surveillance Department is actually separate from the police department. They're kind of their own thing, but they operate a camera network with a similar situation in one of their shopping areas. The Pachanga Tribal Ranger Department has a dispatch center. You can see what that looks like on the right. And the Lac du Flambeau also operate more than 160 cameras in their network. I think I'm doing pretty good on time here. So I want to talk a little bit now. And sorry, is there questions that I should maybe take a look at? Let's see. All right, I'm going to keep going. All right, I want to talk a little bit about border surveillance, and then I'll come back and answer some questions. I think I'll get through this pretty quickly. So going to go back to my friend McKay from the Thana Otham. This is a piece of art that she did of her child with a border patrol surveillance tower in the background. And she says, mothering in the borderlands has really opened my eyes to how militarization and its surveillance affects our youth. It's a fear I never fully understood till now. So, you may have heard about the integrated fixed towers. These are a series of towers that were placed by DHS and CBP, particularly in southern Arizona, from a company called Elbit Systems of America. They're not really Elbit Systems of America. They're Elbit Systems of America subsidiary of the Elbit Systems of Israel that installed these towers or developed these towers for monitoring Palestine first. But you can see that this is one of the towers. This is the San Miguel Law Enforcement Center. This one actually is directly on their land overlooking the border. And you can see on the right what the command center looks like for that. So here is the place in yellow on here on this map. These are those integrated fixed towers. And you can see they pretty much blanket the entire southern end of at least the U.S. side of the Thana Otham Nation Reservation. And we actually have a link that you can click that you can actually explore this map yourself. Now this was a big Most of these happened, uh, around 2020. There was a big divide in the Thana Otham community because DHS wanted to come in and they wanted to build a wall and they wanted to install surveillance towers. And, the younger, more radical activists were like, well, we don't want surveillance towers and we don't want a wall. Whereas a lot of the elders were like, we don't want a wall, but we don't mind the surveillance towers. And so there ended up being hashed out this agreement between the Thana Otham and the federal government that they wouldn't put a wall through their land, but they would install 52, I think now it's 54 integrated fixed towers across their land. Now, something you should know is that the main company that is responsible for installing and maintaining these towers, and not just the IFTs, but basically hundreds of others from other models of towers, is a tribal company. It's called S&K Corporation. There's also another subsidiary called ITL International Towers. They're all owned by the Salish Kootenai in Montana. They really have the major contracts for this. And in fact, as of just a few days ago, CBP put out a procurement document saying that they are going to reissue this contract to SNK to not only um, to maintain the current 478 towers that are part of this network, but to do the 1,500 that they're going to have over the next 3 to 5 years. So they want to triple the number of towers over the next 5 years, and there is a tribal company that is going to be in charge of this. Um, I seem to have lost a image here on this, so somehow my image has dropped. Let me see if I escape and I go. There we go. We're gonna go back to that. Nope. I'm gonna let you see what this looks like by escaping real quick, so you can see this. So another sort of incident I want to talk to you about is sorry, I'm gonna try to see how I can center this myself. Okay, so in Southern California, there is a mountain called Cuchama, which in in English, Spanish, it's Tecate Peak, but to local people and the Kumeyaay population, it is Cuchama. It is a very sacred mountain, but it has been turned into basically a communications tower for CBP. Like they have a communications, various satellite dishes, but they've also put surveillance up there. And so you can see that now on the right. You can see there's a surveillance camera here on the left, and then you see this little pole here with a little like disco ball on the end. That's this thing called the mobile surveillance capability. This is long range thermal imaging that they have now. So the CBP has basically taken over this mountaintop and turned it into sort of the surveillance headquarters for them. We had some conversations and meeting with the La Posta band about Kuchama, and they explained that there's not only one of these surveillance rigs on Kuchama, but on another sacred mountain called Tabletop. And they talked to us that this is really damaging to their, sort of culture because historically the various tribes have engaged in spiritual ceremonies on both of these mountains. But now it not only physically interferes with their ceremonies, but it has a chilling effect because participants don't want to necessarily, do ceremonies when there are these cameras right above them. They're worried that maybe CBP is making fun of them, recording them, and it's just totally inappropriate. I wanted to sort of show you the entire Kumeyaay territory. So I've kind of grabbed the historical land of the various tribes that make up the Kumeyays, and you can see all of the different surveillance towers now are just basically a non-stop line of surveillance towers throughout the entire land. And here are the various kinds that you can see. One of the kinds of towers that we have now is an artificial intelligence tower called an Anduril Sentry Tower. One thing we came across in our research recently is something that happened in West Texas. So there's a piece of land in West Texas called the Loma Alta site. It has all sorts of artifacts and cultural remains from the people of La Junta de los Rios. So one of the now no longer sorry, I have a dog that's very upset because my wife has just come home. Um, but what they ended up, what CBP and a local ranch owner ended up doing is to put one of these towers there. They just graded over all of this land. And I talked to a local archaeologist who said that this was an egregious act that caused untold amounts of damage, not only to local history, but even to just the history of archaeology in general. And then the final thing I want to talk about is how DHS money has been fueling surveillance and just fueling, has been going to tribes in general. So there's a thing called Operation Stone Garden. DHS sends money to local law enforcement to agencies who agree to participate in Homeland Security and border security operations. So between 2022 and 2024, about 4.6 million has gone to tribes. And for this batch at the bottom, you can see those were specifically to assist in increasing border security and situation awareness, which is code for more surveillance in the borderlands. And just to give you like one example before I close this out and take some questions, um, if we look at the Nooksack tribal police in Washington, they took Stone Garden money. Again, this is for border security, and they used that to create a surveillance system in one of their casino parking lots. As you can just sort of see how this all comes together here, like police, surveillance in a casino, the border, federal government, all of it kind of involved in, in this just sort of one example. And with that, I'll just sort of give you my email address and I'll take some questions after this and I'll look at the chat finally. My email is dm@eff.org. I'm on Blue Sky. I have an old X account that I don't check anymore, so don't look for me there. You can add me on LinkedIn. And if you ever want to signal me, email me first or send me a direct message through Blue Sky and I'll send you my signal. We're just going to be putting this online and I don't want to give my signal out to the world, but all of you are welcome to message me whenever you want. And with that, I will go ahead and close that. I'll start looking at questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. And that's, this is a scary topic. There are a few questions in the chat, and there are a couple of questions. One of the topics was MMIW, MMIP, and Ray actually put in the chat as well that they have, can share a little bit towards that topic as well. If Ray, you want to answer to some of that, and then kind of piggyback off of what that topic, Dave.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your Friday night to listen in on this really important topic and also putting your questions in the chat. As we can see, surveillance or the investment in surveillance doesn't seem to be the best use of public money. There are absolutely times where um, officers or people who have this kind of access, which is frankly a form of power, right? To have access to things that are used, quote unquote, for the public good, in order to harm women. And I don't believe that surveillance technology is the most appropriate thing for MMIW. There have been too few cases of missing persons, like cold cases, um, being solved with these kinds of technologies that it doesn't justify the cost. Um, and there's also an issue, and I used to work at the New Mexico State Land Office. I was a political appointee. I was Assistant Commissioner of Cultural Resources. And so I'm very familiar with how these kinds of technologies and the issue of jurisdiction can complicate issues for tribes, for law enforcement, um, and archaeology and the future of our culture, how we maintain our cultural traditions and beliefs through land. And like some tribes don't allow LIDAR. I believe the Pueblo of Laguna doesn't allow LIDAR, or it's like heavily like controlled by tribal historic preservation officers. There's also concerns about, someone put in the chat, about drones or cameras being used to surveil sacred areas that where the land is being destroyed and we can never get it back to where it was. um, and all of this is connected. I just it's a little concerning to hear all of this, or no, it's not a little, it's very concerning to hear all of this and how tribes are making this investment, but we have heard nothing about in the news from tribes or even in this presentation about how it's being used for good, because there aren't instances, I don't think, of where public safety is actually being used or is actually being protected by investing in these technologies. And we can see that with the collaboration between tribal law enforcement and federal agencies. And the case of the tribe in Washington, where they are given the power essentially to act as state law enforcement and federal law enforcement, and they don't have to disclose, they're not at they don't have they're not held to the same disclosure laws as other law enforcement agencies, which is incredibly concerning. So yeah, I wanted to address that, that even if we had technology being used for good in these instances, there would still be a jurisdictional issue that technology cannot solve when it comes to MMIW.
I would say so. I'm not an MIIW expert. I want to just sort of say that we we had a lot of meetings with people who live in Ciudad Juarez, where they also have a problem with women being murdered and disappeared. And there is this massive surveillance network that the state of Chihuahua is building in Ciudad Juarez. It's like a 20-story tower with tens of thousands of surveillance cameras around the city. And most of them are already functional. And they pointed out, they're like, well, how come people are being missing all the time? You're still not finding people, but yet you're finding stolen cars. And that's because they've essentially invested in a technology that's good at finding stolen cars and is not actually good at finding the things that people are most concerned about, which is murder, right? Like, and violent crime. Um, and also another sort of important thing to note is that like surveillance doesn't stop crimes from happening. It doesn't stop violence from happening. I think, oftentimes we hear of like school shootings happen and suddenly they're like, we got to install this surveillance on, to prevent school shootings. And I'm like, well, if we look at Uvalde, like there was no shortage of surveillance cameras and body worn cameras and all that there, and it didn't stop anything. So I don't know. I don't know that any of these systems like they're designed to capture information on everyone, but they're not actually like designed to solve the crimes people are most concerned about.
Amazing. Another question in the chat as well is, given these rates or given these tools haven't meaningfully reduced violence or drug-related harm, what evidence is used to justify their continued expansion, especially in marginalized communities?
So usually it's anecdotal. The companies are very good at creating media kits that they give to law enforcement that every time they, you know, uh, you know, I'm not going to say it's like totally ineffective. Like they do find people, but I mean like that's, it's going to happen if you're doing mass surveillance. You are going to solve crimes. But also like it might be used in it, but it might not be the reason you solve the crime. That's a whole other conversation. But the point is that when something happens and say flock or a drone is used, the company comes in, they're like, here's how you write a press release on it. Here's how you make a video for it. Let's promote it. Let's put it on the social media channels. And so it's frequently all anecdote based. So they'll pick one thing that happened and they'll make it seem like that actually is a huge societal thing. We've even seen the company Flock, like, essentially whitewash what they claim to be academic studies, where they'll have their own staff do research that makes it sound like crime has gone down in a city, and then they'll whitewash it through a university when ultimately they just wrote it as a marketing document.
Got you. Thank
Um,
you,
but
David.
but I would also this is all just like public safety is controlled by politics, right? It's usually by elected officials, and elected officials have to be seen to doing something. And so, if they can make it sound flashy and cool, that might be something they can sell when they're up for re-election or they're trying to sell to the public. And it doesn't really matter whether it works or not. Doesn't matter because we're talking about a lot of theater.
And another early question too that I'm not sure if we touched on specifically, but they ask, is there evidence that these surveillance practices are concentrated in marginalized or historically over-policed communities rather than in wealthier neighborhoods?
Oh yes, there's a different version of this presentation covers a lot of that. Um, you know, um, because I think when I'm doing this presentation about tribal police, well, I mean I'm talking about like 100% over policed and marginalized communities, rather than like portions of it. Yeah, so what we see is sort of two things. One is surveillance concentrated in marginalized or historically targeted communities, but we actually do see it also in wealthier business areas. So like it's designed to like support like high-end retailers and things like that, like business interests, and to target like poor communities or black communities or whatever your ethnic minority is in a particular city. So it's a little bit of both. And if you can, I mean, that kind of is the dynamic that you'll have your high-end retailers who are like, oh, we're getting shoplifting, we're worried about this, we want to make sure we're keeping certain people out of our neighborhood. We'll pay for it, you install it in our community, and then we're fine being surveilled because you're keeping out other people. And then meanwhile, you'll see these gunshot detection devices and license plate readers installed in other communities as well.
And those are again a scary topic. Those are all of the questions in the chat. We'll give like maybe another minute if there are any other questions or comments from our attendees right now. And in the meantime, just to confirm, Dave, we can send these out this design deck or the presentation to our attendees, right?
Yeah, yeah, you can send it out.
Uh,
So there's a Google Drive link that it's just public. You can just share that. And I would say that's probably the better thing to share. I can give you a PDF, it's just the PDF is quite large. And also I can also make some edits or something else I discovered tomorrow morning I can add to the slide deck.
I have
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I just to kind of like wrap all of this up before we get more questions, and how it ties to reproductive health. Just a reminder to folks that Brittany Pulaw in Oklahoma has been criminalized for miscarriage management, with her pregnancy. There are people who are being targeted, especially Native folks, Black folks being criminalized, especially in states where abortion is being banned. And now white women are starting to feel the hurt of not being able to access abortion care, because of doctors being afraid of losing their medical license, and these pregnant folks are being referred across state lines for fetal anomalies. So this is very much tied to reproductive health when our people are being criminalized for the outcomes of their pregnancies, whether it was a desired pregnancy or not, whether they wanted to have an abortion or not. Young people under 18 who are seeking abortion care, their caregivers who are helping them are being criminalized for helping them seek abortion care. Abortion funds, especially in Texas, are being targeted across the country for assisting people, and there are laws being made about the potential prosecution of abortion funds or anyone who helps someone get an abortion, all under the guise of public safety and public health. And so we're seeing the use of these surveillance technologies to track people across state lines. We just saw how common it is and how widely the practice is being used to share information with other law enforcement agencies across state lines, across jurisdictions. And that is incredibly concerning because if you have tribal leaders and their police departments who are not as informed about reproductive health and the repercussions of surveilling people, again, under the guise of public safety and public health, we're criminalizing our own people just for seeking basic health care or being unable to control the outcome of their pregnancies.
Thank you, Ray, for adding the specific repercussions to all of this. Uh, yeah, it's important, and I think the main thing that we, especially as Native peoples, is protecting privacy, and you know that's not just within our traditional community aspects, but just everyday life, especially in the work that we do as Indigenous Women Rising, funding families who are in need of reproductive full spectrum care. You know, those are still identity issues. We don't release information, and that is a threat. This is all the surveillance is a threat to the work that we do as well. And there are no other questions in the chat. So, and we are at time. And I just, Dave, thank you so much again for sharing your wisdom in this. And this is like new information to me as well. And I know it was for a lot of people. We don't hear about this often. We know it's existing. We know we're being watched, but we don't know how. So to put an identity to the specific programs and the funding where it's coming from and why it's happening is it just wraps it all up in a way that does prove, and does show for systemic racism. There was a comment in the chat, that this information is appreciated because it does show how systemic racism is real. And just the amount of inaccuracies when it comes to POC, communities of color, and just the links to the tribal nations and how the tribal nations, the leaderships they are kind of nodding to this type of surveillance. So it's scary, and there are a few thank yous in the chat as well. People are expressing gratitude. Just as a closing for Indigenous Women Rising, we will be at the Roundhouse. The 30-day legislative session started this week. So if any of you are out there and you see us, say hello. We'll be there. Also, we are shadow banned still on our main account on Instagram. So if you don't see us sharing as much as we have or used to be, it's because of those restrictions as well. So feel free to follow our backup, our collaborative page, Reproductive Sovereignty, where we post pretty much everything on our main page there because the shadow ban doesn't exist there. Those are just a couple of announcements for us. You can catch more of our content on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook. We have a website, iwrising.org. So yeah, please reach out to us, spread the word on this presentation as well, and we will follow up with a mass email to our listserv of the slide deck that Dave provided for this presentation as well. So with further ado, if there's any closing, Dave, that you would like to express before we sign off.
Yeah, I would just like to say like one last thing is that if you are, have financial means, like we're, both IWR and EFF are both member supported and donor supported organizations, and nonprofits like us are under threat quite a lot under this administration, whether that's threatening to take away our IRS tax exempt status or threatening to, various ways that they are now threatening the threatening nonprofits who are working in our space simply for speaking about the things that we care about. And so I would say that if you were thinking about donating and you didn't donate at the end of the year, donating at the beginning of the year is also good.
Amazing. Yes. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate you. And thank you all again. Have a safe rest of your evening, and we'll catch you on the next webinar.